Once. There we go. Good evening, morning, night, afternoon, wherever you find a way to watch or listen to this podcast. This is me, Omar from Hardware, and we have a little bit of special edition kind of podcast. This week's been busy with recording. I'm sure I think this is about my third or fourth recording this week of some sort. But we're joined, me and Mike, good old friend of the podcast. We've talked about the OVC, the Big South before, are joined by a special friend. I'm just so grateful for the strings that Mike was able to pull for this podcast to get Kent Brown, a long tenured member of the Illinois Athletic Department, SID for the past or for the last 23 years of his tenure with the Fighting Illini from 2020 to 2023. And I'm just so grateful that he's on. And I mean, just so excited for this conversation we're about to have. So thank you, Mike, for getting Ken on, and thank you, Ken, for being so gracious with your time and joining us.
My pleasure, and anything for an old Raja. That's what I would say.
Exactly. Thank you.
It
Yeah, that's been a long time ago, hasn't it?
has been. I just 42 years since I graduated from Atwood Hammond, so it's been a while. But always love to stay in contact with anybody from back in the day in Atwood or Hammond, Illinois. That's where I grew up and where I enjoyed started learning about sports and stayed in contact with a lot of people. So I always appreciate when somebody reaches out.
Well, I appreciate you coming on with us, Kent. One thing I do have to say is Kent was part of the class of 1981 at Atwood Hammond, and that was probably the most athletic class that Atwood Hammond produced, possibly in history, as far as football and basketball combined in one season. Atwood, if you go back and read the history and study the history, over the years, Atwood has had successful football teams back in the 60s, 50s, and then they've had successful basketball seasons, but I don't believe they've ever had one like we had in 1980, back to back
That
with
was a pretty
football
good
and
year.
basketball.
We were 14-0 and won the state football championship that year in 1A. It was a small school, and then in basketball we finished with a 25-4 record and made the Sweet 16. Lost by 1 point to Pana in the Sweet 16, or we would have been in the state championship or state tournament, the Final Eight, the Elite Eight in Champaign. And so it was a fun time. We just had a large group of. It was one of those in small schools, every once in a while a group of people, young people, come through that are all athletic. And so we happen to be a class of 65 is the largest class in school history, and probably 35 boys, and probably 30 of those 35 played one of played the sports. And so it was a pretty athletic group. So it was a lot of fun, a lot of great memories. Those are the glory days for some of us.
Yes, there were. Just to kind of put it into comparison, my senior class in 1985 at Atwood Hammond was 23.
23,
That
yeah,
was
yeah,
all
we're
we
the
had
largest
in the
class.
team.
It all dropped off after that, no doubt.
Um, anyway, I guess enough of our history at Atwood Hammond. Since we don't have a high school or a football field anymore, um, our school has consolidated with Arthur, Lovington, Atwood, Hammond, which actually that kind of brings me to one kind of the tail end of your career at the U of I. But our alma mater actually produced a four-star recruit for uh, Brett Bielema and the U of I for this. He's an incoming freshman this season. Kind of what, if you can, kind of tell us what your thoughts are about having a recruit like that come in that is kind of near and dear to our hearts.
Yeah, so I was very excited and very proud that to have him come from my alma mater. His mother grew up in Hammond, which is a very small town. It's where I grew up, 500 people, and so his grandparents. She's a little behind me in school, so I don't really remember her too much. I don't remember meeting her, but I do remember her parents. And so when one day I was asking our recruiting coordinator to tell me, give me some local football recruiting scoop so I have some information. and he started telling me about this kid from Atwood, and went to Arthur High School, Arthur Atwood, Hammond, all the towns. And I was like, that's kind of my stomping grounds and my alma mater. And so tell me a little bit more about him. And he said, yeah, the coach had said they've got a young kid. He was going to be a sophomore that year, and pretty well built athlete, different than any athlete they'd ever had. And he said he'd seen him on the basketball film and as a freshman, and he stood out, right? I mean, he looked the part. And so I lived in St. Joseph, Ogden High School, just outside of Urbana for 20 years, and my kids all went through school there. And so I still help out every once in a while, like at the basketball tournaments, keeping the scorebook and scorecard, whatever they need help every once in a while. Anyway, Caden's Fagan's sophomore year, they played in St. Joseph, and so I got to see him in person. And he walked out on the floor as a sophomore in high school, and I thought he looked like a 27-year-old bodybuilder. His body size was incredible, and he caught a ball underneath the basket. He caught a ball underneath the basket, went up two-handed, and dunked it with such ease, with explosiveness, that I was just shocked. I mean, most high school sophomores don't do that. And so it was pretty evident he was a pretty special athlete. And Illinois offered him to a scholarship that early on like that. They could see that. And then a lot of scholarships followed from a lot of big schools, Michigan, Tennessee, a lot of large schools, big time schools came after him. But I was always told that his grandfather said he was always going to be an Illini, and he was going to make sure he got here. And so very excited when he committed and then signed here. And I think there's a lot of promise and potential down the road. Potential is a scary word because that means that it's unproven, and yet you think there's the bar's pretty high. And I think the bar's really high for him. He has a very special athlete, and so who knows how much he'll play here as a freshman. There's some guys ahead of him, but he's got a chance to be a very, very good player.
I agree. I believe he has a chance to be extremely special.
Yep.
It amazes me, Kent, that because I watched him basically from his JFL. I saw a few games when he was younger, and then all through high school. And it just always amazed me to watch him on the football field, just how much more mature he appeared to be, even as a freshman or sophomore. And I've heard I hear it all the time. I hear from several people, well, he's from such a small school. How productive can he be in the Big Ten? Well, who's to say?
Yeah, I think this is where, when there's special athletes like that, and that's what, Illinois, we have a really exceptionally strong football staff, coaching staff at this point in time, who really know how to develop young talent. And this is a developmental program. And so we're not in the spotlight to be able to get a lot of 5-star and 4-star players. And so even though he was rated high as a 4-star by most people, we don't have a ton of those on this roster. And so Brett Bielema and his staff, and he is really good about putting together staff. Though those guys will develop young players, especially good athletes and special athletes, and to be productive players. We've seen that. Devin Weatherspoon a year ago was the number 5 pick in the NFL draft. Now, he was recruited by Lovie Smith's staff, but he was a 0-star. He had no other offers. He was going to junior college and comes here. And even though he was very athletic, he had not developed yet to an NFL level player under the previous staff. And so Brett and his staff, to their credit, took guys like him, the Brown brothers, and several others, and have taken them and put them in a position where they can be successful at the professional level. And so I think he's on a good staff to do that, and I'm excited to see how they're going to do it. I just feel right now, and having been around a lot of football staffs for the last 36 years, we've had some good groups through the time, but I don't know that we've ever had a stronger staff from top to bottom than what we've got on this campus, at least the last since Brett Bielema came here. That group, it was very evident when he got hired, when he started naming who the coaches were, they were going to be very, very good and very impressive. There were 3 or 4 guys that first year who you can identify are going to be head coaches someday. And if you have those types of coaches and that coaching depth on your program, you're in a good spot. And we lost one last year to Purdue, but I can tell you there's 3, and I think Ryan took one of our guys, Coach Kane, who I felt was a future head coach. Um, I'll tell you, Brett Bielema has replaced those guys with guys who have a chance to be head coaches. And so I still think we have a number of really high level coaches on the staff. I think we're in a better spot than we've been in a long, long time in terms of the football staff and where we're at and what we're developing and the foundation that's in place.
Right. I agree. Kind of, now you tell me if I'm making the right comparison, but I've watched a lot of Illinois football over the years as well. And with the staff and with the recruiting, I kind of compare in some ways John Mackovic and Brett Bielema, just the way they compare and kind of the way that they develop players.
I think that's probably pretty good. When John Mackovic came to Illinois in 1988, he was left a loaded roster by Mike White, and Mike had accumulated a great group of players. Jeff George, who would be the #1 overall pick in the draft, had redshirted. The defense was absolutely loaded with guys like Mo Gardner, Derek Brownlow, Mel Agee, Henry Jones, Quentin Parker. There were a number of future pros on the defensive side. Howard Griffith was on the offensive side, along with Jeff George, Mike Bellamy. There were just some really deep and good talented players on that group. So John took over a group that was already in place. They have 2 totally different personalities. John Mackovic was a extremely smart, extremely talented football coach who was very had a great presence as a leader. Brett Bielema has probably a much more bigger personality, engaging personality, type of person who can sit down and really talk to almost anybody at any time and really connect with them. And so he's got a different personality from a coaching standpoint, from knowing X's and O's and being able to teach the game and let drive those young guys to a higher level. I think they're probably very, very similar in that. It's just that their personalities are quite different. And Brett has the ability, and I think a lot of that I'm going to say a lot of that has to do with his background of growing up in a small town in Illinois, a farm community in Prophetstown, who he had to get to know a lot of different people and engage and talk to, and that was the type of personnel that his family kind of instilled in him, his parents. And so I'm very bullish on Brett and what he has going for us here at Illinois, and the future is really bright as long as he's in charge of our football program.
I agree. Well, I guess I'd kind of like to back up just a little bit. I know you started out at the U of I as a grad assistant in I believe in 1986.
Yeah, I was a student in 1986, and then graduated in 1987, spring of 87, and then I was a grad assistant for 2 years, and before I was a full-time staff member starting in the summer of 1989. And so with that era I was very fortunate. The basketball program with the Flying Illini were uh, in place, and so I got a chance to be around them and get to know them very well, and continue to be friends with most of that group. The football program was really starting to take off. I still very connected to a lot of the people from that era. A lot of the players, they recognize me when they come back and when they looking for familiar faces, and I'm one of them. And so yeah, I had a chance. And so for 7 years, I was an assistant in the sports information office here at Illinois, and it was a great time period. We went to several bowl games. We had some incredible players. Dana Howard was a Buckus Award winner. Kevin Hardy was a Buckus Award winner. Simeon Rice was an All American. I already mentioned Jeff George, Mo Gardner, guys like that. And then I had a chance to go to Kansas State University as the head sports information director. And in the 4 years I was at Kansas State from 1996 to 2000, we won 42 football games and rose to number one in the country in 1998. And to the point where if we'd taken care of our business in the Big 12 championship game against Texas A&M, we would have been in the very first BCS championship game against Florida State. And I feel like we let one get away. We lost in double overtime to the Aggies in St. Louis that year. And it was an incredible experience. There we had a couple of college football Hall of Famers in that on that time. Michael Bishop, who's in the current class that's going in, was the quarterback who finished second in the Heisman Trophy voting. Mark Semino was a linebacker who ended up in the College Football Hall of Fame. Bill Snyder was the head coach, and he's also a Hall of Famer and really one of the all-time great coaches. And so that was a really formative period for me to deal with a really high-level national media on a regular basis because of the success of that football program. And so in 2000, the opportunity opened up to come back to Illinois. And this is where my roots are at. This is where I went to school. This is where family was from. And so it was an opportunity to really rejoin my own, my people back here in Central Illinois. And so football, 2 years later, the second year that I was back, our football team won a Big Ten championship and goes to the Sugar Bowl to play LSU. Our basketball team, Bill Self was hired shortly after I came back. And so our basketball program won a Big Ten title in Bill's first year. And his first 2 years, we won Big Ten titles, finished second place by a half a game in his third year. And then that's when he left, and then obviously Bruce Weber came in, and we won two more Big Ten titles the next 2 years. So I thought that was the way it was always going to be. I thought we were just going to win Big Ten championships all the time. And it's hard to explain that after that we went into a little bit of a tailspin where we didn't make it past the first weekend of the Big Ten tournament or the NCAA tournament for many years. And so I feel like we're kind of getting back where our basketball program should be. It took too long probably for a program and school like Illinois with the history and the facilities and the resources that we have. But to have both of those programs in really good shape at the same time, Illini Nation really gets behind it. And you can tell we have some great fans from across the country who follow us wherever we're at. And the passion they have, especially for our basketball program. I mean, as well as I do, if you're an Illinois basketball fan, the passion never ends. It's a year-round endeavor to know about the roster and what's going to happen and who we're going to play and how the schedule is going to go and who's next, who's recruiting, and what's the team going to look like a year from now. Even though we haven't played any games yet, everybody wants to know about the future. And so I think we're in a good spot with both those sports.
I believe so too. If you could I guess kind of what Omar was talking about, the bowl games, but I guess the one question I was kind of wanting to ask is, over the years on the side of on football, um, compared to where football and the NCAA was at when you first started to now, it's changed so much.
Well,
What
the changes, and I can, listen, I mean, the world's always going to change, right? And so it's been 35 years. And so if I take that 35 or 36 years prior to when I started, it would have been 1952. Okay. So I think a little bit, I'm trying to put perspective of how things changed from 1952 to 1987. And then from 1987 to 2023, there's a lot of change right in between there. And so, there was forever, because of our compliance with NCAA rules and Big Ten rules, we were always worried about if a player took an extra cheeseburger from the food line, or somebody, did anything different than what the rules allowed. And so it was such a stress point to make sure that we followed the rules correctly. And over time, as the money has gotten bigger in terms of the television contracts and our television partners, and the Big Ten is the beneficiary as much as anybody. There's a lot of money there, and so the players are the ones who are putting their careers on the line every day and working hard. And so somewhere along the line, there needed to be some rules in place to allow some sharing of that revenue some way. It never made sense to me. It never made sense to me that a music major on our campus could go play in a band at a bar on campus and make money, give music lessons to youngsters and make money, go give singing lessons somewhere, make money by their talents, and yet a tennis player could not give tennis lessons, a golfer could not give golf lessons, a football player could not get paid to work a football camp with youngsters uh, because it was against the rule. It never made sense to me when you had this change when regular students could make money on their skills, and because they were an athlete, they couldn't make some money on their skills. If we'd have done that somewhere along the line years ago, I don't know that we'd be in this place today, where we're at, where it's become such a crazy feeding frenzy in terms of the name, image, likeness rules. I do think that the NIL was probably long overdue because of what I just talked about, and so I'm excited for many of these young people to uh, make a little bit of money, and so for some, it's a lot of money on their name, image, likeness. But where it's gone wrong, right, is um, the use of that for recruiting purposes, the use of that by schools to allure transfers, that type of thing. And so the rules right now are so all over the place across the country, and the state rules, the laws that are in place, there's just not a lot of consistency. And so it makes it very, very difficult to play on an even field when everybody's playing by different rules. And so until we get probably some kind of a national legislation in place, it's not going to be very pleasant. So therein lies, a big change. The athletes, we've had great athletes for many decades. And so from an athletic standpoint, it's hard for me to think that today's athlete is significantly better than the athlete from 30 years ago or 35 years ago. I can tell you that they're probably training better today. They're probably eating better today than they did at that point in time. But we haven't had many better athletes than a guy like Simeon Rice or a guy like Henry Jones in the early 90s. Those are the type of athletes. I mean, Kenny Battle, Nick Anderson, Kendall Gill, those are superior athletes, whether that was 30 years ago or 3 years ago. Those people could play. But I do think that a lot of this, from the the right, which again, I'm not against this, but it's just a big change, was the ability to transfer, the transfer portal, right? It's almost like a free agency thing. That has changed. Coaches now have to basically re-recruit their team almost every day that they're on campus, or they will just pack up and they'll put their name in the portal and leave. So it's hard for all of us, fans, media, staff, to get to know those players like we used to when they would be here for 3, 4, 5 years, and now they may be here for about 6 months. You know, we've had basketball players basically come in August, play through March, and then they're done, and they don't, they leave campus and you hardly ever get to know them. You don't get to see them again. So our fans have a hard time getting to know them on a more personal basis, which we've often had to do. So gotten a chance to do. So those, to me, those are the biggest changes. And it's again, I don't know that it's necessarily always bad. I just know that it's a change, and a lot of us would rather not have so much change. It's all happened at one time. That's probably the other thing. It's just all happened within the last 2 or 3 years with the NIL, the transfer portal, and the really the rights that have been given, the power that's shifted back to the athlete.
Right. That's one thing that has struck me is, you touched on NIL, and I have tried as much as I can to study and learn as much as I can about NIL and the transfer portal. And I've decided that I don't have enough time. I don't have 27 hours in a 24-hour day to try to figure it out. I mean, I couldn't understand when they, I believe it, now correct me if I'm wrong, Ken, but was it California that actually passed the first NIL law?
Yes, so California, so there was already discussion happening around the country, and California went ahead and their lawmakers passed the first NIL opportunity, which tripped the trigger for a lot of states. And so all of a sudden, Florida had their own law, and they actually, California had passed their law, and it was going to become legal, I think 2 years down the road or three. It was going to be a time period in between the actual passage and when it was going to become legal. Well, then there's states like Florida, and others who turned up that schedule a little bit, so it was going to become legal sooner. I think Mississippi was one. I know Florida was one. Maybe Texas was another, and so that kind of forced everybody to jump into the game a little quicker than maybe everybody really wanted to. Josh Whitman, our athletics director at Illinois, was very instrumental in helping draft the legislation passed here in the state of Illinois. He worked very closely with other ADs around the state, but his legal background allowed him to really put together some, working with some of our state legislators to put that framework together for that actual legislation. So, yeah, California started it, and the biggest thing that we're all watching, those of us in athletics, and even though I retired, right, I'm still watching it closely, is another California law that's not quite law yet, but it's working. They've attempted to pass it. Is a revenue sharing opportunity that allows athletes to share revenue driven off their particular sport. So for football, for instance, there would be some kind of a formula in place that how much money is driven from that school's football program in terms of television revenue, ticket revenue, those types of things. And then it would be shared 50-50 with the athletes. And the players would split it evenly for everybody on the roster. and then the school keeps the other half. And so that did not move forward this last year. I do know that it's something that they continue to bring up. It would be a monumental shift in the revenue for athletics in our country, and how business is handled. So I don't know that anybody except for the athletes would probably like to be. And so I think what we're seeing is that they're trying to come up with a way to maybe share that revenue, maybe not quite so drastically, but somehow share something in there so that there's a way to provide some of that without becoming an employer-employee relationship, which brings a whole new set of rules. And I'm not sure the athletes really want to be considered employees, because if that were the case, then all of a sudden maybe their job security is not quite the way it is today. For instance, our athletes today are guaranteed 4 years of uh, not everybody's a full scholarship, but so football and basketball players, let's talk about them because that's what normal people we're discussing here. They're guaranteed 4 years of scholarship aid, which should allow them to graduate. So, but if they're now an employee, I think that could easily now you could lose your job, right? You could be fired, you could be cut, and you lose some of those benefits that you have. There's insurance coverage that goes with being on a team that whole time. There's just a lot of benefits that come with being a student athlete, and to lose that because you're become an employee may not be worth it. So it's a there's a lot of unknowns where we're headed with this. It's a very interesting time in college athletics. Um, we all see the numbers that are being thrown around for the television contracts. We know that coaches get well paid. We do know that athletes are with the collectives that are helping provide NIL opportunities for our athletes. There are certainly some athletes who do very well in that space, but it's not everybody. It's just a very interesting time in our world, and so and there'll be some and more additional crazy changes from a lot of us who have been around for a long time that we kind of shake our heads. Just it's hard to understand uh, some of the things that they're dealing with.
Right. Well, that one of the things with red shirts, we our primary focus is FCS, and that's one thing that I've learned just speaking with Chris Wilkerson at Eastern, um, and some of the other SIDs at Eastern, Western here in the state, and that seems to be one of their biggest concerns is where are we going to be when NIL, if NIL continues to be on the path that it's on right now, because it's hard enough for them to recruit, uh, you know, high caliber athletes. And one of the concerns I always, that I've heard a lot is, well, we can recruit them. They come here for one season and then they enter the transfer portal because, for example, Texas A&M, all of a sudden Texas A&M comes in and offers them the collective, or a booster offers them, and they're gone. And it's very hard for the FCS to really compete right now with anything as far as the
No,
FBS.
you're right, and there is no good answer for that because of the way the rules are right now, and so it's almost impossible for the FCS level, the mid-major level programs to have a consistent roster, because if they are very good, they immediately look for other opportunities and are probably being recruited by schools to have them to give them a better opportunity at a higher level, which they probably see as a better avenue towards professional sports. There is no good answer for that. I don't like it either. I mean, there's a lot of things I wish that were the same. I just know that we're probably not going to go backwards. And how it all plays out and how it's all going to work out, I think there's still a lot of unanswered questions about where we're heading with it.
Well, I'm gonna let Omar ask you a few questions if you would.
Jump in here, Omar.
Yes, sir. So, I mean, just great questions, Mike. I mean, really enjoyed the discourse for sure on just the future of college athletics. My first question is just about the bowl run. So, I mean, you mentioned the 2002 or sorry, 2001 Illinois team that went to the 2002 Sugar Bowl. Was that run to the Sugar Bowl more special than Illinois going to the Rose Bowl in 2008, New Year's Day 2008, 2007 season? Because I think that was Illinois' first Rose Bowl in over 2 decades, and like second since I think the '64 Rose Bowl with Dick Butkus. So I just want to know your thoughts on that.
So I think I mentioned, when I first got started in the late 80s, we had a good little run. My first bowl game was the All-American Bowl in Birmingham, Alabama. My second one was the Jeff George led team in 1989 that we go to the to Orlando and play. We were a top 10 program and had an incredible experience. 10 days in Orlando around that, beat Virginia uh, in the game 31-21, I think, and played. Felt really good about the bowl situation. Um, Looking forward, that the 2001 team that won the Big Ten championship did not go to the Rose Bowl that year because the Rose Bowl was part of the BCS, and and so that meant that the Big Ten champion, if not part of the BCS championship game, would be shifted to a different place, which was the Sugar Bowl that year against LSU. The 2007 game team and 2008 Rose Bowl was an interesting story because we went into that. If you look back, Illinois, we had an incredible win over Ohio State at Columbus that year when Ohio State was number one in the country, and it's one of the great fourth quarters in Illinois football history. Juice Williams led the quarterback. Our quarterback kept the ball the last drove out the last 7 or 8 minutes of that game, and kept grinding out first downs. I mean, it's like we were 3rd and 3 every time we turn around, and he was getting 4 yards and getting a first down to run out the clock. It was really one of the best Illinois victories ever. And so it put us in a spot. We had lost a very, very tough game at Iowa earlier in the year, or we would have won the Big Ten that year. It was on a penalty. We lost on a penalty because I think Eddie McGee, who was a former quarterback and had shifted to wide receiver, had lined up in the wrong spot as a wide receiver, had covered the tight end, and which you can't do, right? You have to be shifted back, and he was like a half a step forward and was penalized, took away a touchdown off the board, and we ended up losing the game. So if we were to win that game, we would have won the Big Ten, and I don't know that we would have been in the BCS championship game or anything, but we would have won the Big Ten. So it looks like we're going to go to either Tampa or Orlando because we finished second in the Big Ten that year, and it looked like Ohio State was probably going to be knocked out of the championship game. But lo and behold, there were some things happening that last weekend of the season, and Ohio State shifts back up into the championship game, which was going to be played in Phoenix that year. And all of a sudden, that Sunday, as all these things are happening, it's Ohio State in the championship game, and all of a sudden things are falling in place, and we're getting word that it looks like we may end up in Pasadena. And sure enough, it fell in place. We were talking with the folks in Florida. I'm telling you, that's where all our plans, all our focus was on getting our ticket plan ready and our announcement ready with the folks in Tampa or Orlando. We didn't know which way it was going to go, and all of a sudden, it just shifted quickly to Pasadena and just fell in our lap. So that became a huge surprise. The experience in the Rose Bowl is unlike any other, with all the tradition that goes around it. But that trip to New Orleans was pretty incredible as well. You know, you want to win the bowl games, you want to win those. It makes it so much more enjoyable. But I will tell you the experiences of both of those were fantastic, and I wish we would have had more of those level games. I had a chance at Kansas State we played in the Fiesta Bowl one year and won that game. You know, incredible experience. We played in the Cotton Bowl. We played in San Diego, and so we had some wonderful bowl experiences. But there's something special about Pasadena, the granddaddy of them all. The parade that morning, the game with the mountains behind the stadium in the late afternoon in Pasadena. It's a special place to play a game and to be a part of it. And so I feel very fortunate that we went there. In 1983, I was a student here, and I couldn't afford to go to Pasadena that year. And I remember saying, well, I'll just go the next time that the Illini go. And in 2001 or 2002, we played UCLA in the Rose Bowl, just, you know, a regular season game. That's where they're home. And so it took till then to play a game where I was at in the Rose Bowl. But then that 2007, 2008 Rose Bowl game became the next time for me. So it doesn't happen very often. So I always, you know, if anybody asked me today, I would tell, you know, if you have an opportunity to go to something like that, don't say I'll just go the next time. Try to make it happen so you get a chance to experience it. But yeah, all the things that happen around that game make it a really special experience for everybody, for the players, for the team, for the staff, fans. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I love your point on like don't wait until the next time because in 2020, you know, I'm an Army football fan. When I was a senior there, in 2020, all the COVID stuff was happening, and Army found its way into the Liberty Bowl, and I was like, you know, there's never gonna be another time likely when Army's gonna go to the Liberty Bowl. So, you know, I just took the flight on like 12 days in advance, and you know, saw Army play in the Liberty Bowl. So I totally get that. It's just great to hear. I always love rooting for. I love parody the Rose Bowl, which like you know now that the Big Ten and the Pac-12's agreement with the Rose Bowl is you know pretty much I think in the past for the 12 team playoff.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know where we're going to end up with that, right? I mean, the
Yeah,
tradition started in 1947 was the first Rose Bowl, and Illinois played UCLA in that first Big Ten Pac-10 Rose Bowl game, and I would think that it's going to be really difficult to keep that tradition going. Right now, it looks like there's only a couple of schools left in the league, and then and to reconfigure that with programs that would really be worthy of that level bowl game, I think it's going to be impossible. So yeah, this year, I'm not sure how the bowl. I haven't looked at it that closely or how the bowls line up this year, but it will be very difficult in the future for the Pac-12 and Big Ten to continue playing that game. So I'm sad that tradition is going to go away. That's going to be one thing that's really going to be sorely missed by a lot of people.
yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a regret, but I kind of wish I went to a Rose Bowl. You know, with the Pac-10, with the Pac-12 and the Big Ten team, playing in it. You know, I had a chance last year, but instead I chose to go to the Cotton Bowl with the Tulane and USC. Yeah, it was
Great
like
game.
Tulane's first. Yeah, really great game. Tulane's first major bowl in like 9 years since the Hoover administration. So equally as historic. But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of sad because I feel like college football is passing the Rose Bowl by, but I have confidence that the Rose Bowl will still remain an integral part of college football. Maybe that's just optimist, the eternal
No, I
optimist.
agree. I think it'll be a part of it'll be a big part of college football and be a part of the playoff the college football playoff, which isn't going anywhere. That's only going to continue to grow in importance, and the Rose Bowl will be a part of it. It's just that long-term tradition that's really going to be missed. The Big Ten, Pac-10, Big Ten, Pac-12 game is really going to be missed because of the tradition of those games. And now, of course, for those teams that were part of that rivalry, the conference rivalry is going to be a part of our own conference. And so uh, just it's going to take, I think, everybody 10 minutes or so to kind of get their hands around it, right? It's going to take a few minutes to get a understanding of what it's going to mean moving forward. And again, it's a change. It's change, and it's something that we're going to have to accept because I'm as we all know, we won't be going backwards. We won't be going backwards.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I guess with that note, you mentioned the Big Ten expansion to now 18. I guess from your perspective, are you a fan of, I guess, where the Big Ten is going in terms of geography, its media presence and everything?
You say a big fan. I'm a supporter of the Big Ten. I do know that there's a lot of smart people making those decisions. Um, there was a time, and when I was getting started, it was 10 schools in the Big Ten, and and then it shifted when Penn State joined the league to 11, which I think was a great decision. Um, I understand every decision that's gone along here. Um, the UCLA, that's the way. So Nebraska again was very disgruntled in the Big 12 at the time and was looking for an opportunity. Their football history and tradition made them a very probably popular choice to join the Big Ten. I don't know that Nebraska's football tradition, what they expected is quite carried over what they expected to be, right? I mean, I think they felt like we'd come in and contend for championships every year. And I think they found that road a little bit tougher than what they maybe expected. The Rutgers Maryland edition was I think obviously it was a television driven decision. It allowed uh, the Big Ten to bring in the Washington D.C., the New York, New Jersey markets, television markets, which were at that time when television revenue was driven off a lot of subscription based with cable and that sort of thing. It was a big decision. As we see cord cutters and television changing, I think maybe those decisions may not be quite as significant today as they were at that time. Um, UCLA and USC were obviously looking to make a move when they contacted the Big Ten to find out there was interest in allowing them to join our conference. They were having all kinds of frustrating television discussions in that conference at the time. The Pac-12 network was not nearly as lucrative as they had hoped and expected to be. And so they were looking for some way to even the playing field with the competition that they were facing. Uh, the revenue difference between the revenue that was being driven in the Big Ten and the SEC was far outweighing what was happening in the Pac-12. And so both those schools and the markets they were in, which happens to be where Fox headquarters is at, which Fox Sports is the major television partner for the Big Ten, probably played a role in that as well, right? I mean, I think that's been reported, and it's pretty obvious that there's there was some help to get that done. I'm not sure that any additional schools after that really brought a lot of value in terms of television markets. But I do know that it appears that Fox stepped forward again and said, okay, Oregon and Washington, we will help provide some additional revenue to bring that if you add them to the roster of teams that you have. And so we saw that movement happen. We just saw Stanford and Cal make the move to the ACC, and this is after Colorado had already jumped back to the Big 12, and then the other corner schools with Utah and Arizona and Arizona State make that move to the Big 12. So I don't know where we're headed. I don't know who else the Big Ten would want to add. There's one school in South Bend that probably brings value, and they've shown no interest in giving up their independence from football. They've been certainly had opportunities over the decades to join the Big Ten and have chosen not to. But that is probably the only school that brings value, additional value to the Big Ten in terms of the television rights. The more schools that are added, the more complicated the scheduling becomes, and the more complicated the travel becomes. I don't know that it's so much football travel because already we're seeing games have been played from teams have traveled from coast to coast already for non-conference games and other things. So the travel part for football isn't quite as troublesome as many of the other sports that are sponsored by departments. Basketball, playing those midweek games, if you're Rutgers and you have midweek games at Seattle or in LA, I think they're probably going to want to figure out how to make that a one trip and two games, right? So they're not flipping back and forth. And in the other way, UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington are when they come east. I think it's even tougher to travel and play in the east than it is to go west. How are they going to be able to balance those schedules and play those games? Because there are no sacred nights any longer in basketball. Every night is a Big Ten basketball night, and so it's a way that it's just going to be very complicated to try to figure out those schedules so that to allow the athletes a recovery period and class. That's still important. They still have to go to class, and so how are they going to do that? So we haven't seen the schedules for the future yet. We haven't seen even schedules for this coming basketball season yet. Those are probably a week or two away before those become released. But a lot of work, I think, is being done on what they're going to do. And we haven't even talked about all the Olympic sports, the baseball, softballs, tennises, volleyball, soccers, and how they're going to be scheduled with those schools from coast to coast. So that's where the biggest question still arises: how are we going to get all those done and yet allow students the ability to go to class and to be students, but yet compete at the highest level. So uh, I I liked UCLA and USC coming in the league. I'm a little torn on what Washington and Oregon bring, except it really helps those two schools by giving them some other West Coast playing partners, which I think is important. I do think it's important that they're out there, that they have somebody to go play.
I think it's an interesting take because so many times you see just takes on the topic that are one side or another, never really like in the middle, seeing the good and the bad in it. So I think it is interesting, and really everyone's just at this point everyone's just speculating. That's all you can do about
Yeah.
how it's going to turn out with all these conferences. So I mean, we'll see for sure. I never want to hope for any conference to have a downfall of any sort. So just hope it works out for all parties involved. Uh,
The Pac-12, they made, you can look back now, and I haven't studied it super close, but it appears that they made some fatal decisions obviously in terms of their television contracts. So the Pac-12 network, when the Big Ten network came into existence, no one knew what it would drive. Jim Delaney It was his idea, and our Fox was our partners with it. It has probably gone way beyond what anybody's expectations were. And then the ACC network and the SEC network, they're partnering with ESPN, and so they've given up a lot of their own power and value with those because of their contracts with them. The Pac-12 tried a whole different distribution model, and it just did not work. It just didn't work, and so they fell so far behind that the schools that want to compete were finding they were just going to fall farther and farther back. And then this last negotiation was just an absolute disaster for that conference because they couldn't come close to what some of the schools expected to get and what they thought they deserved. And so it's too bad. I will tell you a story. Many years ago, we get together, our groups each year, in the Big Ten, the different groups get together for a day or two of meetings to kind of go over conference things and whatever issues of the day. The sports information directors every year get together for 2 days to go over our policies and our procedures and talk about our media days, scheduling, and just a wide range of issues. And the lead person rotates between every school rotates. And so one year I sat in that chair one year. I was at the front of the room, and Jim Delaney came in to address the group, and Jim Delaney's sitting right next to me. And so I had 5 minutes with Jim Delaney to chit chat, right? So I remember asking the question because the Big Ten television contract had been, at that time prior, had been really the most lucrative in the country, and the Pac-12 had just signed a new contract that made it the highest paid school for television contract. And I remember asking, I was like, because I know there's some competition, I know they're competitive people, and it's like, Jim, I said, boy, the Pac-12 contract that just got signed, it's pretty impressive. I mean, what are your thoughts on it? And his immediate thought was what he said, didn't even hesitate, was, I love it. I think it's great. And it kicked into me is because he knew that the value of the Big Ten and the Big Ten schools and the alumni and the television numbers so far outweighed the Pac-12 that if you're comparing what they got, and he knew ours was coming up in about 2 or 3 years, he knew what our number was going to be huge. And that's basically where we're at, right? And so he was right. He knew how to play the cards, and he knew how to make it work. And I feel bad. I feel bad for the conference, that the Pac-12, and that it's going away. But there were some fatal flaws that their leadership allowed that to happen. They could have done that in a better way, and they'd probably still be in existence.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, the downfall of the leadership of the Pac-12 is something I think will be studied for, ages to come. Maybe it's exaggeration, at least for in college football circles, at least it'll be studied. But yeah, it definitely it's definitely a study, I think, in greed and I guess just following trends and like not knowing your own self-value. And I don't mean that in a degrading way, but
No,
um
it's
it's just what it is. Um, so my last question is, I mean, kind of a change of gears. I mean, in recent years, we've seen Northwestern try to, I mean, solidify themselves as Chicago's college football team, playing multiple games at Wrigley Field. Has Illinois ever thought about doing something like that? Maybe not at Wrigley, maybe at guaranteed rate, home of the White Sox.
well, if you look back a little bit, Illinois has played several games at Soldier Field. I will tell you that the teams that we took up there were not great teams. I think if we did it again with Brett Bielema at the helm and with some success, like we're showing in some promise, I think ticket response would be much better than it is today, than it was then. The last year that we went up there was um, uh, after Tim Beckman had gotten fired earlier in that year, and Bill, our coach at the time, was in an interim situation, and Bill Cubit, and it was not a great situation. At the end of the year, Northwestern doesn't bring fans. They don't really bring fans to Champaign. And so we thought, okay, we take a game that doesn't draw big fans. Let's try to take a Chicago and see if we can draw more fans. And which in essence, we're losing a home game, right? The home team advantage, which was never really what we wanted. We had played Washington and South Florida at Soldier Field, and the crowds were not great. They were just okay. Not, we could have done better in Champaign. It's a great experience, but it didn't work out. The year that we played Northwestern at Wrigley Field was Northwestern's home game, and they signed an agreement with the Cubs to play a series of games there. I will tell you that after that game, I remember Ron Zook saying that we should play Northwestern every year at Wrigley Field. The atmosphere was off the charts. Even though it was Northwestern's home game, the crowd was at least evenly split, if not 60-40 Illinois, who bought tickets to that game. There was a lot of orange in the crowd that day. And so I know that Ron was, even at that time, said, if we have to give up a home game, it'd be worth it to play Wrigley. That was incredible atmosphere, right? So I know that they would be welcoming to us moving a game up there. Mike Thomas did discuss trying to move a game to guaranteed rate field. But at the end of the day, coaches don't like to give up home games. And I can tell you that our current head coach does not want to give up a home game if he doesn't have to. And I think we could talk all day about how the atmosphere is great and how much fun it would be. At the end of the day, I don't think he wants to give up a home game. And I don't disagree with him on that. I mean, there's a lot of advantage to that. So trying to play a game there, a non-conference game that maybe a 2-game series where it's home, where we play, let's just say Kansas, right? Let's say play Kansas at Wrigley, and then we play Kansas at Arrowhead or something, something unique like that would be a way to possibly do it. But I know Brett doesn't want to give up home games if he absolutely didn't have to. He really didn't want to give up the game that we were supposed to. He really didn't want to. I don't think he really wanted to play the game in Ireland like we were supposed to play Nebraska a few years ago that during COVID got dropped, and that would have been his first year. And I can tell you that I'm not sure that he was that excited about moving a game from Champaign to Dublin, Ireland. Would have been a great experience for everybody involved, and I know he understood that situation and would have done it. But I think he was happy that we ended up playing that game here, which we won. Right, we beat Nebraska that day.
Well, that's no fun for Coach Bielema, but I understand. I know another coach is like particular about keeping games on campus is Troy Calhoun. I remember that he turned down a deal from the Denver Sporting Commission to move their 2013 game against Notre Dame to Mile High or Sports Authority, whatever it was called at that time, the Broncos Stadium. And I think the attendance that I guess the projected attendance showed that Air Force lost a couple $1 million by not moving the game to Denver. So it's just interesting the way that coaches are, which I mean, I understand where they're coming from, but as a fan, it's no fun.
Yeah, I can't argue with you on that. There's some the experience of playing those, and we've played games over the years in some of those venues. We played at Ford Field in Detroit one year against Western Michigan, which was not a great decision either. We've played games in Indianapolis. We've played games at Soldier Field. We played in Missouri down in the Dome in St. Louis. We have played some of those games around, and the experience and everything around it makes it memorable for sure. But there isn't a coach anywhere that wants to move a game away from their home field if they don't have to.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I definitely see where you're coming from. Those are all the questions I have. Ken, thank you for answering them so greatly.
Well, I tell you, anytime we can talk about sports, I'm always up for it. And so appreciate your guys' time tonight. I enjoyed telling stories, and anytime you want to do it again, I'd be willing to, because I've got a lifetime of stories, of sports stories of Illinois athletics and other things that every once in a while just kind of have to be shared, pop out of my head. So they're kind of stored. It's kind of the DNA of an SID is remembering sports trivial things, and I've got a head full of them. So I'm willing to share those anytime.
Absolutely. I
I
mean, and I'm
appreciate it.
willing to listen.
Right.
Well, you
No,
guys are kind.
I appreciate your time, Kent.
Yeah, you
Thank you
guys are
very
very
much.
kind. I appreciate that, and appreciate scheduling and having me on. And hopefully we get a chance to do it again. All right.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Sounds
All
good.
right.
Thank you, Kent, very much.
You guys have a great evening.
Thanks. You
You as
too.
well.